Hello, everybody. My name is Ranbir Singh. I'm the chairperson and one of the founding members of HHR, Hindu Human Rights Group. Now, HHR was formed because at the time, just as the 21st century dawned, human rights organizations like Amnesty and even the Hindu organizations, established ones, ignored the persecution and oppression of Hindus worldwide and the discrimination they faced. Now, there were several issues at the time that got our attention. Around the year 2000. One was the issue in Fiji, which was an ethnic conflict, but also had a religious dimension to it as well. And also the persecution of Hindu minority in Bangladesh. Of course, other issues did come around the same time that have been ongoing for many years and hardly been looked at. This included the persecution of Hindus in Pakistan, the ethnic cleansing of Hindus from Kashmir in India itself. So, although it's a majority Hindu country, oppression of Hindus does take place within India. Let's not forget South Africa was a black majority country. For decades, apartheid, while the white minority oppressed the majority in that country. Okay, so it should come as a surprise. In doing so, we also found that Hindu imagery was being mocked and denigrated. Now, the argument against that was, well, it's freedom of speech. It's freedom of expression. Well, yes, but why is it always targeting the Hindu imagery every time? And there seems to be a bizarre correlation, between denigrating Hindu sacred imagery and ignoring persecution of Hindus as a people and belief system. That seems to go hand in hand. Of course, more recently, the correlation made between how these denigrate pagan and many indigenous cultures around the world. Native Australians, Native Americans, now of course they're idealized as noble savage, but at the time they were exterminated, and it wasn't just the people who were killed off, their beliefs were openly attacked as well and mocked. That actually continues unabated. You have to look very far to see that it dominates the narrative. Now, in terms of what Hindu rights achieves, obviously in order to attack the constant Hindu phobia and anti-Hindu rhetoric, you can't do it without action. Hence, we protest outside 10 Downing Street to highlight the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh. We've also protested outside the Pakistan High Commission several times, joined with other organizations, Christian, Ahmadiyya, Shia, general human rights groups, to highlight it in Parliament as well as protest. But it isn't just about protesting. It's important to tackle the prevailing narrative which exists. And so our protests, we sold the Voice of India, Voice of Dharma books, managed to get them into 40 libraries, managed to get Decolonizing the Hindu Mind by Cornell into the House of Lords. At temples, we sold about £300 worth of books. And people were telling us that they complained that even at Hindu temples, they were finding it very difficult to source this material. They didn't know it existed until it came about. So even the Hindu organizations and the Hindu sort of charities, temples are failing in that duty. They seem to just have a, ignoring it around it. While spirituality is of course very important, yoga, meditation, nevertheless, you have to live in the real world sometimes. You need an environment where those things can actually flourish. In terms of how Hindu imagery was denigrated, Roberto Cavalli, he had Hindu sacred imagery, gods on bikinis sold in Harrods, managed to get that removed. In fact, his daughter Christina came to UK, apologized, said, look, we didn't denigrate it, we love Indian culture. You see, all it is, it's a misunderstanding. And that's what it's doing. Not everyone does these things, with a sense of malice, but when the prevailing narrative is so Hindu-phobic, they pick it up and don't realize they're doing it. So it's important to educate people with that. Managed to get Minelli, the French shoe company, to remove Hindu gods from shoes, which is very insulting having it on there. In terms of actually, we didn't stop here. In hotel toilets, there were images of Hindu gods and goddesses, got that removed. In bars, they were there, got that removed. And I think, again, I return to the idea, it's their expression, it's their freedom of expression to do that. But why is it always the Hindu imagery that's being used for it? And again, that goes into the fact that when Hindus in Kashmir are ethnically cleansed, this seems to be very little debate or notice of it. Often they're called migrants, as if that movement out of our homeland was voluntary and not done at gunpoint almost overnight. To tackle that, we've had double talks in parliaments, met with MPs. Someone in the parliament from India discussed the issue with Hindus in Bangladesh. A Pakistani journalist got involved with the issue of Hindus in Pakistan, helped a girl who was kidnapped to save her. You know, girls have been taken to safety in Pakistan, Bangladesh several times. You know, what we find is that politicians generally aren't necessarily hostile to it. They're just not aware of these things happening. And that education is very important. At one point, we even got the BBC to change their website regards to issues like the Aryan invasion theory. Now, the problem here is, you know, Hindu human rights has worked well with other organizations. For example, I've spoken at the Al-Mahdi Institute in Birmingham, a Shia Islamic institute on the issue of religion and human rights. Okay, I told freedom to say what I wanted. Worked, I said, with Christian organizations, with others, or with Jewish organizations. And the thing is that we don't really find that much hostility because everybody generally wants to, you know, work together. Yeah, but the hostility, strange enough, comes from other Hindu organizations. Now, to understand that, you have to understand the mentality in other countries, especially India. In these countries, unless you're politically linked, you're not important. Yeah. So while in Western democracies, elected officials are public servants, in places like India, they're almost elected dictators, down to a very pettiest official. Without their help, nothing gets done. So if you don't keep on side, you can't even do the most simplest of tasks. And that is being imported here. So when you have such a dog-eat-dog situation, you then have competition amongst various organizations. So even when it comes to working towards a common goal and highlighting persecution and those issues, they don't work together. And that is why, you know, we will achieve much more how these other Hindu groups work with us rather than constantly against us. And that actually is the thing we want to end on. How long are we here for? We have a responsibility to try and improve the world. The future's not set in stone. Or we can't change the past, we can change the future. And unless, for example, more is done in this area and less sort of undermining takes place, then we're going to keep going in circles. And in 20 years' time, we'll still be discussing these same issues. In the 21 years HRI has existed, the concerns that we started with and raised, they haven't gone away. They've actually increased, and I would say got worse. While there is at least more awareness amongst Hindus, and that's a good thing, what is missing is the action, how to change things. You can be aware of something, but you can't, if you go out in the rain, no, it's raining, you don't get an umbrella, you can get wet. Yeah, and that's what's happened here. There seems to be very little concrete, coordinated action and how to change the narrative and change people's opinions, which are strongly misinformed and are a colonialist hangover and haven't moved on. And that's what's needed to be done. Okay, well, thank you all for listening. That's it.